And they said, well, can we have more discussion up there? I said, sure. And I said, especially if you have video school, you can start and stop it all you want. Talk about stress just a little bit. I'm not exactly sure how this works, but this is amazingly accurate. Read the description completely before you look at the picture, because the picture has two identical dolphins in it. It's used in a case study on stress levels at St. Mary's Hospital. Look at both dolphins jumping out of the water. The dolphins are identical. Closely monitored scientific study revealed that in spite of the fact that the dolphins are identical, a person under stress would find differences in the two dolphins. The more the differences a person finds between the dolphins, the more stress that the person is experiencing. Look at the photograph. If you find more than one or two differences, you may want to take a vacation. How are y'all doing? Everybody okay? They look normal to Shane. Yeah, Shane said it's two beautiful dolphins.
We passed the tornado.
Two cows. Okay, let's talk a little bit about complicated mourning or grief. There's at least 9 occurrences that may complicate grief. Multiple deaths is the first one. One death is definitely devastating, but dealing with the set of losses, it overloads. It kind of blows the circuits on the emotions. So like if you had like several people lost in a car accident. Remember about a year ago, the family was traveling from somewhere in North Texas or South Oklahoma. It was all over the news, and they were going on vacation to Disney World, I think. And probably, 5 or 6 of them in the van, and I think they were not all of them were killed, but at least half the family was killed. In Louisiana. Yeah, very tragic. That would be a terrible, terrible, complicated grief situation for that family. Complicated mourning. I'll give you an example of a complicated grief. My mother's had 2 husbands die, but the first one was my dad. Now, my mom was only 40 when he died. He was 45. He died in March the 15th. I got married in August, right before. Daryl got married in November. So, and it just happened that because he had leukemia, they had moved to Dallas, where Daryl and I were going to Bible college. And so we moved out of the dorms and moved in with them so we could be together as a family. Well, in August, I moved out because I got married. In November, Daryl moved out because he got married. In March, Dad died, so he moved out. So she's left. So she's grieving, you know. Now, she has a dream. Remember we talked about dreams? She has a dream after my dad dies. And in this dream, and she still talks about this dream, you know. And in the dream, it was so traumatic to her, which it typifies complicated grief. In this dream, a man comes into her house, and he enters the door, and she said he looked like a pallbearer or a funeral home worker. She said he had a suit on, a white shirt, and he comes in, he walks down the hall, and she said he goes to a closet, and he takes out 3 suits, you know, me, my brother, and my dad. And he takes 3 suits, and she said he goes back down the hall and leaves and goes out the door and never comes back. And she said, you know, that was me, my dad, and my brother leaving her and abandoning her. And she reminds me of that about once a year. And of course it's worse now because she's got Parkinson's now, so she's, you know, she's in the later stages with that, and she only remembers things like that. So, but and she's real sensitive, which is a symptom of that. And so, anyway. But that's another example of complicated grief, unresolved. You know, she should have got over that. Dear Lord, I'm 40. Oh, no, well, oh gosh, I'm 56. And I was, what, 23 then? 23 then. I mean, come on, Mama, you know? So anyway, that's complicated grief. Complicated grief or mourning, a violent death from accident, suicide, or murder. These events are additionally weighted with overriding concerns about the possibility of the person suffering. The guilty over the inability to prevent the death, shame about the way it occurred. You may also have to deal with distractions from law enforcement and other official agencies. When I went to work for Odyssey Healthcare, you train for 2 weeks. It doesn't matter who you are, what you do. You got to go through their orientation, their training. And then you've got to travel with the chaplain for, I think, 1 week. And then you're on your own. And the first weekend I took call. You know, traveling through the week, you do your normal visits and everything and your routine. And of course, you take death calls and what have you when somebody's imminent and things like that. But then you have to take call. And you, depending on how the schedule's set up, you may take call for 7 days. You know, you may cover call for 7 days, or you may do it every other night or whatever. And at that time, we were doing 7 days. And I went on for my first by myself call on a weekend. And my very first call by myself was a Chinese man in Plano that committed suicide, hung himself in the garage. And he was a terminal patient. Well, everybody was. But he, because of his culture, there are a lot of Asians in Plano, smart people with money. And because of his culture, he couldn't bear the thought of his daughter and his wife having to care for him. Because when you're on hospice, Medicare pays for it. And but they only provide a caregiver. At least this is how it was then, 3 days a week, to bathe you and things like that. So, you know, when you get to, you know, you're debilitated, you know, changing diapers and things, you know, the family has to help out. They'll do certain things, but the family pretty much is the own hands caregiver. And their honorable culture, a man just couldn't perceive his wife and daughter doing that. Do you understand? And so that's why he got up early in the morning. It was about 2 a.m. when they called me. And he hung himself in the garage. And so this is the situation I went into on my first call. It worked out fine. Everything was good. But very traumatic for the family. They understood because they understood their culture, you see. And they understood his motive for doing it and that whole thing. But I don't care if you understand. You're traumatized by this. You're already dealing with this progressive dying and this terminal illness in the home and everything. And now it's abruptly brought to an end in such a traumatic way. You don't overcome memories like that. The wife actually woke up, found out that he was missing, and found him in the garage. That's a memory that the chemicals in your brain imprint, literally, on the brain. You don't forget that. Every time she'll go to the garage to get in her car or whatever she does out there, she's going to see him hanging there. I still see him hanging there. But I don't think about it, you know, unless I have a reason to, like tonight. I hadn't thought about it in years, you know, until I have a reason to. So, but you minister to people in this situation, and you prepare them, and you let them know in advance that you're going to get over this, you're going to get through this, there's help. Here's what you need to expect. When people know what symptoms to expect, it makes a world of difference. You know.
Is that what you did?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is what you do. And you're going to find that people, sometimes you can't do it immediately, because if this, like in that situation, it just happened. You know what I mean? I mean, they're just totally like blown off their rocker. You know, you're going to have to come back. But, which is what I did. Right at the moment, all I did was just offer comfort and care, and, you know, basically you're there and you're assisting and you're calling people and you're doing things for them that they don't know what to do. You know, they're just devastated. All they did was they called the office, and the office calls you, and you understand what I'm saying? And right now it's just a matter of do what's got to be done, and then you progress. But from a pastoral position or a counselor position, the first thing you want to do in a situation that erupts like that, or if it's a car accident or a tragedy and you're called the emergency room, first thing you do is you just
Here we go.
to comfort people. Okay. We were talking about complicated mourning or complicated grief, and we said that questionable deaths, actually I don't know if we said that yet. We said multiple deaths, violent death from accident, suicide, or murder, and questionable deaths is number 3, which is not knowing or being sure about the circumstances can lead to intense anger and frustration. Witnessing the death while seeing a peaceful, tranquil death may be of some comfort. Watching a person die leaves a permanent imprint. The last impression may be all the more horrific if the death were under difficult or unusual circumstances. So, it's just hard to forget what you see. I remember watching my dad as he actually died. I'll never forget it. And it wasn't really a horrible thing to look at. It's just not a good memory. You all understand what I'm saying? Number 5, discovering the body. Finding the body is obviously shocking, and having to break the news adds additional trauma. Hearing the news, learning of the person's death in a callous manner or getting confusing or dishonest information primes us for problematic mourning. Sometimes hearing about it in the media or from other people or on Facebook is not a good thing, and that happens often now. Secrets discovered after the death, discovering that the person mourned as a mother was actually a grandmother, or that they had things in their life that were not known to the family. Secrets and things like that can be very painful. Talk a little bit about being stuck, which basically would be emotional hindrance in the ongoing progress of grief that's necessary for healthy recovery. That's what being stuck is. It would be a hindrance of extended or prolonged grief that reflects an already existing difficulty with grief. A wide variety of symptoms could be guilt, self-blame, panic attacks, feelings of choking and fears. So it can be physical, as well as also emotional or mental complications. Physical symptoms are similar to those of the deceased person's terminal illness due to over-identification with the individual. In other words, it's not unusual for a person to start thinking they're having symptoms similar to the person who just died. You'll see, we've even had some movie stars in the last few years that have had some operations to remove healthy body tissue for fear that they might contract a disease that their mother had or somebody had when they themselves had no symptom, but concerned that it might be in their DNA or something. Or maybe people will imagine they're having the symptoms of it or something. A restless searching for what was lost and a lot of purposeless random behavior and moving about. They're just lost. You might see people moving from one location to another location. Physically moving their home, just looking for purpose and place because they're lost without this individual in their life or something. A reoccurring depression that's triggered on specific dates, such as the anniversary of the lost, birthday, deceased person, holidays, even becoming the same age as the person who died. It's real normal to in the grieving process of 12 to 18 months for with each month, in other words, obviously when the trauma or the death, whether it's normal or traumatic, it starts out at a peak naturally, and it gradually starts to, as it improves, the graph goes down until a birthday or something, it shoots back up, and then it begins to go back down again, and then maybe a holiday, it shoots up, birthday, it shoots up, or whatever, and then the anniversary of the death, it peaks again, or something like that, And so that's normal. And then, of course, after about 18 months, there'll always be the anniversary and missing them at the holidays and things, but it won't be as traumatic, it won't be as painful and as emotional after, the normal process of grieving is passed. You always think about them and miss them, but it'll get better. Feelings that the loss occurred yesterday, even though months or years have passed. This is a sign that you're stuck. In other words, if these things don't tend to progress in a normal pattern, and eventually where they're not interrupting life in its normal way, then you're stuck. Enshrinement or unwillingness to remove belongings of a deceased person after a reasonable period of time. I don't know if you like British movies and things like that, but for some reason I do. And there's one, I can't remember the name of it, but it's something called Meadows or something like that. And we watched the whole series on Netflix, Laurie and I. And these people, they're a modern family, British family. They live in a castle on this beautiful little lake. And they have these multiple thousands of acres that they oversee. And they're the head of kind of like no, it's not that one. But they're the head of this, it's a Scottish, actually it's like they're in Scotland. It's actually like a Scottish clan that they're the head of, and they have these yearly gatherings and things. Anyway, I told you that to say that, what was my point I was on? What was that? Yes, in the movie, before the series actually started, they just inform you of this, that sometime in the past they had lost a son in that lake. And they had this one bedroom they keep locked up, and everything's exactly as it was many years before when he died. And this happens to a lot of people that are stuck like this. They didn't heal in the grieving process. Of course, in the process of this series, which goes on for several years, you have to, of course, when you're watching on Netflix, you don't watch it for several years. You watch it, get it over with. But eventually, through happenstance, the room gets invaded accidentally and has to be repainted and everything, and they get through their grieving as a process of this accident. But it takes them years. This happens to people. It's like they'll have this room that nobody's allowed to go into, and it's like a museum or a shrine, and this will happen sometimes. So, those were Daddy's trophies. Don't touch them, or something like that. It's a sign that that they need help breaking through. Inability to talk about the loss without breaking down, especially when it occurred over a year before. Extensive thinking about and noticing themes of loss in life. Minor losses that trigger major grief reactions. Little things shouldn't cause great major outburst emotionally, unless there's something deeper that's not resolved. And if you see this in a person, if it's a loss, but it's minor, there's probably a bigger loss lurking somewhere in the background that's prompting this. And they're just not able to handle that little straw, when it's added. Phobias about death or illness. Certain cultures are almost generational about this, almost pass this along. They don't want to talk about death, Hey, don't talk about dead man, It's just like they're really spooky about those kind of things. Excluding anything or anyone who used to associate with a significant loss or deceased person. Compulsion to imitate the deceased person due to over-identification with him or her. And the three most important steps to take in helping a person. And basically it all involves around listening with your eyes, ears, and your heart. In James 1:19 and Proverbs 18:13 instruct us to do just that. Then how to help? Well, first of all, listen for emotions as well as body complaints. People will complain of having physical problems, but you also can hear the pain in their words, and you can see it in their emotions. Watch their face, watch their body language, and you can tell. You can almost tell when someone has unresolved issues. Their voice will break. Their eyes will shift, and reflect emotion. And it's body language. Even if they're trying to not express it verbally, it'll show up in their face or in their body. Assess them. Part of your involvement is to determine what the person's psychological, physical, and behavioral needs are and how well they're meeting those needs and how well they're functioning. So basically, and a lot of the way you do that is just observe them and ask them questions. Just ask them some basic, simple questions. And it'll help you pinpoint where they're at. And you can kind of figure out how they're getting along and how they're faring and working through things. And then normalize the situation for them. This is one of the most important steps that you can take. You may need to, this may need to occur verbally again and again, but also by sharing with them this ball of grief. You can show them that graphic that I showed you of the ball of grief, and they may need your validation again and again. In other words, you may not resolve it just one time, but then you may have to go back with them and help them through this. Then reassure them. Let the person know that he or she will be able to survive their grief journey, although at times they may not believe that. Encourage them. Lend them your faith. And encourage them that they're going to get through this. And just remind them that you're there to support them and to walk through this journey with them. And then of course, support them. Help the griever discover, develop a supportive network of family and friends, neighbors, and professionals. When you assess them, you can kind of question them and kind of just observe them, and you can tell at what level they need help. If they really seem to be pretty critical, you may want to recommend them to get professional help, or at least see a Christian counselor or a pastor. Or you may just simply encourage them to get into a small group somewhere. Sometimes churches or communities will have grief groups. Sometimes they're called grief work, things of that nature. Grief work is a it's kind of a national organization that has groups in some community buildings and some churches, and it's a real healthy, good thing. You can find them in a lot of communities. Things like that can be very beneficial and helpful. And then help them plan. Planning is the heart of any type of counseling and coaching, and it just simply means laying out small, realistic goals for them to follow through with. One of the biggest things about grief, trauma, crisis situations is the disorientation that takes place in a person's mind. When you're traumatized, it's like you lose it, and it's hard to get your bearings. It's hard to figure out what to do next. You don't know who to call. You don't know what to say. You don't know what to do. You can't figure out. You're just overwhelmed. Kind of like the story Shane was sharing. The lady, I can't live without him. It's like your brain wants to shut down and just kind of go into park and shut off. And what he did was perfect. You just immediately step in and say, here's what's about to happen. Your kids are coming, and you need to pull it together right now and make some plans on how you're going to welcome them and how that you're going to all get together and work through this together as a family. It's amazing how a little bit of guidance like that will help them. What she didn't need was, 10 pages on steps of what to do, She just needed some real quick, momentary guidance to get her through today and tomorrow maybe. You see what I mean? And then you take it from there and you work through it. And that was perfect. Clarify. Identify the griever's goals and purpose in counseling sessions, and then intervene. There will be times when you may need to correct their beliefs or even their behaviors or plans, which means you're reassessing the situation each time that you come in together for counseling and you're meeting. So you're doing a little bit of probing, and that's your job. That's the way you assess. You ask some questions, you find out what's happening, how they're progressing, how they're doing. And then from that, you kind of help them, because a lot of people become vulnerable during a time like this. And I know you don't want to believe this, but there are people that prey on people like this. I mean, that is their career. Believe it or not, there are people that watch the obituaries. I know that's hard to believe, but they do. Sometimes there are even people in churches, there are even people in the community that just, when it happens to someone they know, all of a sudden they show up like they've never shown up before. And, we can help keep an eye and just kind of help people, kind of keep a sound mind. when they're in situations like this. Educate. And we talked about, the fact of teaching. And of course, it can happen in indirect manner if it needs to, direct or indirect. But it really helps people. It will bring relief to people if you can explain to them that your symptoms are not unusual. You're not going crazy. These are not strange emotions or feelings that you're having. This is normal. I know it's not pleasant, but it's normal, and it will eventually be over with. You will get through this. You will get healthy. Here's what I like to tell people. It's a sign you are healing. It's a sign you are progressing. If you were not having these symptoms, I would be worried. That's what you tell them. Okay? And it's the truth. People who are cold and clammy and just, I'm fine. Well, are you having any of these symptoms? No. I want to go, liar, liar, pants on fire. You already showed me you got the top one, denial. You see what I'm saying? So we're having problems, right? And monitor them. Look for signs and symptoms. The griever is stuck, overly distressed or needing support. If they need some medical help or whatever, just kind of help them and encourage them along the way. Now, here are 4 steps to progress in ministering to a grieving person, a mourning person. Number 1, remembering is the first step. Encourage them and have them to just realistically offer a complete review of all their recollections about the deceased and the mutual relationship. And just, they need to express it. They need to go through and try to just tell everything they know. It's really very healthy for them. And all means precisely what it says. The full range of memories, needs, feelings, thoughts, behavior, and interaction. Patterns, hopes, wishes, fantasies, dreams, assumptions, expectations, and beliefs. It also means all the aspects of each of these memories and all the feelings about them. Good, bad, happy, sad, fulfilling, unfulfilling, comfortable, uncomfortable, and so forth. It's real important because this actually helps promote healing. It helps them get and express outwardly everything that's inside because all these things are churning in them. These are the thoughts they're having. They're going over and reflecting every dream that the two of them talked about. They're thinking about everything that failed. They're thinking about everything they were going to do. They're thinking about everything in the past they didn't do or tried to do. You understand? All this is happening. It bottles up. They need to express it. And you're there to be an ear just to basically hear it and witness it, not so much for you to hear, but for them to verbalize it. Okay? Then they need to fall into the step of recalling. This is the significant and perhaps insignificant events and occasion. It helps in relearning the world without the person. So we're back to having people tell their story in their own way and timing, but telling their story has 2 places. At the first telling is accompanied by pain. Now you ask them helpful questions to help direct the person. And here's an example of how you can do that. What are the stories you can tell about, we'll just call him Frank, about Frank that brings a smile to your face, okay? Happy stories, you understand? Pleasant memories, all right? What are the stories that bring the greatest pain? Now, who would like to hear your stories about Frank? And how could we make that happen? Grieving people want to talk about Frank. You see what I mean? They want to talk about him. Funny thing is that most people that are around grieving people don't want to talk about Frank. And that's where we as counselors, as ministers, as people in the community that are helpers in the community, we need to get over that fear, that wall, and we need to take the burden off of them, and we need to initiate it. Frank been on your mind today? We think, I can never say that. You don't know it. You'd make their day. You would make their day. Or even better, I'm glad I ran into you. I was thinking about Frank today. What a blessing he was. You don't realize it, but what a refreshing you would be to them. And that's really true. Okay. So when do you find yourself longing for Frank the most? How do you handle that? One of the goals, and something to encourage the griever with, is that someday the stories will be told without pain. And that's the second place of the story. See, here's the thing, and you're going to see this tomorrow, is that when people in grief tell the story, the more times they tell it, the story actually changes. And it changes and it becomes more happy and more positive. Every time it becomes more happy and more positive. And psychological studies have been with grieving people, and they have proven it over and over again, that as a person tells the story, that the pain just sort of like flows out. It's like the whole in their mind, the whole picture, the whole scope of the whole thing totally changes, and the pain and the trauma just sort of like flows out. And after, usually it's about 10 to 12 times of telling the story, it doesn't have to be the same person. Thank the Lord. Usually it's over a little process of time, but they need to find people that'll listen to them. That they get to the place to where the story gets short and it gets wonderful. It's just a wonderful memory. In other words, this terrible, tragic death doesn't become a fictitious story. It's just that all the horrifying details are gone. And now it's a pleasant memory. It's just like God's in control now, and they're in heaven, and it's a good story now. It wasn't that way when the first time they told it. It was pretty bad, sad. So it's real important. Let's see. The next step, number 2, reaffirm their values. So a question to ask here is, can you describe how Frank's death has affected what you believe about life? In other words, has this experience drawn you away from or closer to God? Since the death, has your faith been impacted? And then number 3, a third step, in other words, realize others have different words for it, but it is accepting and realizing that death has occurred. And that's what you're looking for. Have they reached that point of acceptance? You remember that the most general process of grieving, and again I say the most general because really there are more steps than just the 5, but you have you have your denial, you have your depression, bargaining, denial, depression, bargaining, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I'm not even sure I got those in the right order, but anyway, they don't have to necessarily follow that order, but most commonly they follow that order. So when you're looking for them to reach that point of acceptance, and that's typically the last point, obviously, and that's when they have come to a place of peace. They've come to a place of acceptance with it, okay? Number 4 is the last step, and this is when they release it. It's another way of saying goodbye. It's the process of taking a step into our newly unfolding world. It's releasing and saying goodbye. It takes a while, but it may even have to be repetitive. Bereavement's not a malady. We need to understand that. It's not a sickness that we want to recoil from. It needs to happen. It needs to happen. It needs to happen completely. And we shouldn't see people grieving as sick people. Yes, they're in pain. Yes, they're having a difficult time. But the pain of grief is necessary because it's required to bring about the healing process. It's kind of like a physical injury, Even the recovery sometimes hurts. I remember when our son Jody broke his leg when he was 14. He broke his femur. He was in a lot of pain. And then he had to have the surgery, which is a major deal. And then the recovery was difficult because he had to go through physical therapy. But then he had to have another surgery a year later to take the pins out. He had... not pins, what do you call them? Rods. Take the rods out because he was at an age that they didn't leave him in, If you're grown, they leave him in. But anyway, so there was, there was pain in recovery. But it's necessary pain. And of course, God gave him grace and it's good. But, and that's the way it is with healing sometimes. Sometimes it hurts to get healed. Sometimes it's hard. You have to do things you don't want. Recovery's no fun. Nobody likes recovery. Rehabilitation. Things of that nature. Sometimes, occasionally, not very often, because typically the hospice patients don't have any curative treatment. It's just palliative. But occasionally I would have had someone in rehab, and I'd have to go visit them there, and they didn't like it. You know, people don't like that. You don't want to use something that hurts, amen. But that's the way you get it back to health. Is the proper use of it, restoring it back to health, amen. And that's the way you do it. Okay. Let's stop right there. Okay?